Firstly, a big mistake or problem I think that many early stage founders have is they love building something, but you have to switch gears from building to selling. Otherwise, you just keep building stuff and no one's using it, and you're always like adding more features. It's not ready yet, we need to go further. And so all you do is you waste lots of time and money building things, and only later on do you discover that nobody wants it.
Hi all, welcome back on Olium. Marcus, very nice to share that moment with you again. Today we are super excited because, I'm also personally super excited because we have Anthony Rose, founder and CEO of SeedLegals, which is really like part of, for me at least, like the infrastructure of the startup infrastructure in the UK. I started my entrepreneurial journey. I've seen you. I went to your early days event. So Anthony, thank you to be with us, and hello, and thank you to be with us, really.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored.
The honor is really for us, to be honest. So maybe, to kickstart the discussion, I think in the UK there will be very few people who won't know you, or at least the company. But do you think you could give us like a brief, background on yourself, and then explain what, SeedLegals is really in a nutshell?
Yes, absolutely. So I've had a long and checkered career disrupting different kinds of businesses. So my background actually is real-time 3D graphics. And before that, even hardware design. When I was a kid at school, I had a robot machine for making circuit boards at home. But anyway, I was with Kazaa, the music file sharing company. For those old enough, once upon a time, you actually went into a music store and bought CDs or records. It was insane. It was before the internet changed it all. And the music companies bitched and screamed about technology changing their business. They wanted to sell CDs. Actual people in the world wanted to stream stuff on the internet or download stuff on the internet. And Napster and Kazaa kickstarted all of that. Got sued by the music companies in what seems to me a parallel with, New York Times and other companies suing AI companies. But actually, if they rethink their business models, they will emerge with better revenue afterwards, but it needs a rethink. But we digress. And then I was living in Australia at the time. I was hired by the BBC to head up iPlayer. So I flew over to London. I was thinking, the BBC, where are the stock options? But I was persuaded to join them and launched iPlayer. I was with the B for sort of 3 years. But when iPlayer was, took off, it was time for me to go back to startup roots. So I built a startup, sold it, built a startup, sold it, invested in a few, got tired of paying lawyers, met my co-founder, Laurent Laffy, and actually got together at an investor party and decided to create SeedLegals so that no one else would need to go to lawyers. So at least for funding rounds and growing their companies. And so SeedLegals were a team of 160 people. There are about 50,000 UK startups on the platform. In fact, we think the majority of all early stage UK startups are on SeedLegals. And basically, it's the platform and the team that if you're planning to raise investment, you get investment ready, you close your funding round, and very shortly we'll even find investors and connect you with investors as well. So we're now also in France, we're in Ireland, and in particular expanding to the US. And I spend some of my time now between New York and London as we launch SeedLegals in the US.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for the introduction. So maybe can you elaborate? You've worked like through multiple industries, really. From legal now, from music, legal, TV, etc. Is there like a common thread on all essentially your different steps in terms of industries you've covered, or was it really about like the product? Or what did essentially drive you to go from one space to another? Because it seems very diverse.
So that's a fascinating question, and one that I asked myself. But the answer that I've come to is that what I really love is turning an idea into a product, something that people will love and use. And the industry can change, the product can change, but the theme is you have this idea, or co-founder has an idea, you have no idea how to execute it, but the thrill and the challenge is the execution. And, it just is opportunistic that the first one was disrupting music and then disrupting television and now really disrupting legals. I guess another thing in common is that in each case, there were incumbents, existing industries that just didn't want to change. But the march of technology is relentless. And we see this now with, AI and legal, AI and everything. And if you don't transform, you're a dinosaur. And when you've got tech folks or product people like myself who love the thrill of building something new, the goal is never to disrupt an existing industry, because that's a wrong goal. The goal is to give your customer something delightful that will help them do what they want in a new, better way, thanks to technology.
So it's really so what you're saying is more than thinking, okay, I've identified that industry where you have 10 ultra old players. I'm going to kill them. It's better. It's actually, from what you say, the only way to have some form of success is to actually say, I identify a few solutions and a customer problem, and I will focus on this. And the byproduct will be, I'm going to disrupt the dinosaurs. It's more
you've jumped to the heart of entrepreneurship and what drives founders, and I think what makes a successful startup or company. And I think there are two ways to proceed. So let's say you've got a day job and you want to do a startup. Way number one is you analyze scientifically, this market is underserved, and I've got an MBA at INSEAD, and I've got my co-founder as a CTO. And so the Venn diagram intersection of the market demand and our skill set means we'll build X. The second thing is you just noodle around on some problem that's bugging you. And at some point you go, enough, I need to go build it. And it's said that, and by the way, the first method I don't think works. And I've seen some VCs and others posting about it, because you think it's a problem that people need solving, but you haven't identified that the people really need this. So you build it and then no one wants it. Whereas if you identify a passionate problem that you've got yourself, assuming enough other people have it, and you fix it for yourself, you've got a real product that people will want. So I think that now, there's one other thing, which is, sometimes you hear this advice from, for aspirant founders, that you should find something you love and then go build it. This is nonsense, because in my case, would I have woken up in the morning, go, what I feel like, what I'm really in love with is legal document automation. Nobody is in love with legal. But what you have is you have an interesting problem to solve. In my case, I love building stuff. I love building things that I hope people will love and use. And then your first challenge is the technical execution. But then what you fall in love with is people using your product and giving you feedback. And I talk to, multiple founders every day. I must talk to 1,000 founders a year. And I know many more are dependent and trust our products and platform to build their businesses. And that's the thing that ultimately drives you. It's the drug of waking up in the morning and seeing people building their businesses or using what you've got to make, their life a little easier, something faster, something less expensive. And that's the bit you fall in love with.
Yeah, that's really interesting as an approach. I think we've had a few founders on the podcast, and a lot of founders approach it from a product perspective, where they say, you've got to build a product that you really care about and solves a problem for you first, and then almost all the market element of things that comes next to that, the business side, I guess, that is also really important, flows next to that. I was wondering how you when you're looking at new opportunities, is there a specific piece of advice you might have for ongoing founders, that next to the product being solving a problem that's really important, are there any other elements that you look for, like a specific market, a specific size, for example, competition, or?
Right. Well, it's a very good point. I think two things. Firstly, a big mistake or problem I think that many early stage founders have is they love building something, but you have to switch gears from building to selling. Otherwise, you just keep building stuff and no one's using it, and you're always adding more features. It's not ready yet. We need to go further. And so all you do is you waste lots of time and money building things And only later on do you discover that nobody wants it. And so what I like to think is now, thanks to AI tools like Lovable and so on, the way to think about this and execute has changed. And once upon a time, it was build it and they'll come. You had to build a shopping center or a building and then hopefully tenants would arrive. And then agile development and MVP, okay, make a mock-up, make a prototype, test it, and only then go build it. And I think you can now go even further, write the press release. And if no one's interested in running the press release, or, people you show the press release and they're not interested, don't even go to the next step, because there's so much noise these days. And thanks to AI development tools, that cost and time of execution is now so reduced that anything can go from an idea at least to a mock-up and prototype in no time at all. So you're wasting your time and your life and your investors' money by building something before you validate it. And I think that's the number one problem that I see. The second one is switching gears from the building to the selling, because founders, often technical founders, they love building stuff, but then they're embarrassed to sell it. They think it's not ready yet. It seems almost like a letdown, a failure if you have to spend your time. It's a venal thing, the selling of stuff. But actually, that's what your customers want. And if you never sell it, you'll never have revenue. You'll never grow the business. You'll never change the world. And actually, I realized this at SeedLegals. So if I would be permitted a fun anecdote, when we started SeedLegals, I would literally sit on a beanbag in the corridor outside our office selling our product. Why? I was obviously the best guy to sell it. I'm fairly well known. I can explain it. I'd helped design it. So I could answer all the technical questions in a founder-friendly way. I was a repeat founder. And so I do a demo of the platform. And then people go, that's amazing. I'll call you when we want it. And it was taking like a long time. I wasn't really closing any. Nobody was saying, yes, I'll buy. And then we hired our first salesperson, who actually knew nothing about legals or fundraising, was a great salesperson. And I thought, how can this possibly work? I mean, people are asking me all these sophisticated questions about the products. I keep telling them we work on it and it's coming soon and it's on the roadmap and we're building it and so on. But this person knows nothing. How can they sell it? Anyway, after their second sales call, about 30 minutes later in our Slack integration, the customer bought. I was flabbergasted. How is this possible? And then I realized the problem is, as a founder, what I was trying to prove is how clever we were. We solve this problem, we do this, and we transform it. But also, I was signaling consciously or subconsciously all the product features we didn't have and were working on. So the natural inclination for the customer was, I should wait until, of course, this looks great. Call me when it's finished. Whereas our salesperson knew nothing about the product roadmap. They just said, we've got a widget. You want a widget. I sell widgets. The widgets cost $9.99. Would you like to sign up? And our team are there to support you. And so this switching of gears and selling what you've got rather than keep telling people what you will have, I learned is an essential trait. So whenever I see founders and they're explaining what's coming next, dude, stop saying what's coming next. Just tell people what you've got now and get them to buy it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, of course, because you've got to match the both sides, I guess, the product side and also the sales side. I actually, just looking through your LinkedIn for research for this podcast, I noticed that you were actually involved in a lot of the companies that sort of shaped my teens, so to say, I guess. Would you mind explaining a little bit more? I mean, there was one, for example, called Beamly as well, which was a video service, right? Almost like, we've used video content all the time now, but I'd love to understand a little bit more about that one and any other ones that you'd like to share.
Sure. So Beamly, after I left the BBC, obviously I have a background in media and so on, can build things. And so I had this idea that, you're watching TV and you're distracted. You're watching, Twitter, watching Britain's Got Talent or something, but you're tweeting, you're looking at the tweets that go with the show. But TV just beams out at you. There's no back channel, no interactivity. So what if you could have a companion app on your phone where you could have social around TV? So it was really clever. in its time, this was like 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now, it would analyze the subtitles from the TV programs, ingesting them from all the channels, and then create tags so you could look up things as people were talking about something. Greenland, you'd have a tag to click on. It would tell you what's the size of Greenland and the population and the NATO things and all sorts of things. It was very clever. You could use it for scheduling your TV programming and more. And it was pretty popular. We sold it ultimately to Coty, the brand. But the idea, one of the things I learned, which was interesting, is broadcasters like the BBC innovated in creating new distribution for their programs. But one of the things that really depressed me was they failed to innovate in what is content itself. So fantastic with iPlayer, you can watch last night's or tonight's program on your phone, you can watch it today, tomorrow, you can watch it on your PC, you can watch anywhere, anytime. But it's the same David Attenborough program or Have I Got News for You or something like that. Yeah. It's a 30-minute or 60-minute show that's made weeks or months beforehand. It's beamed at you. And when I was at the BBC and talking to other broadcasters, their digital media departments were doing a great job transforming distribution, but their program makers looked down with derision at Twitch, Facebook video, YouTube, and others, going, it's cats on skateboards, it's only kids who watch it. These kids are going to grow up. They're going to want that. They want short form content. So they defined quality as, HD, high production quality standards, drama. That's great, but people also want genuine short form. They want things made like 5 minutes ago. They want crowdsourced, a whole lot of things. And broadcasters despise that segment, refuse to accept it. So what I was doing was I wasn't making new content because I wasn't getting into the content business, but I was creating a transformation around content. But what I discovered is, broadcasters ultimately didn't want to change. And as a result, they just lose more and more market share. I mean, Amazon's production budget is bigger than the entire BBC's. I think it's now several times the BBC's entire budget. So the broadcasters have just lost a space they owned by failing to innovate. And that's key to everything I see, which is if you don't innovate, you die. I mean, I've got well outside the Beamley story into, incumbents not changing. But it was interesting that the idea was to transform TV from without TV, in a sense.
So your entrepreneurial journey and experience is quite dense. I mean, you've done a lot of things. How did you live your experience with the BBC, which seems to be the most corporate life moment of your career so far? How did you live working there? Like, was it easy? Was it hard? Like, when you were developing iPlayer, which was some sort of, intrapreneurial project. I mean, how did you deal with, the others? What were the dynamics there?
That is a fascinating question. So, I'm a startup kind of guy. When I was at school, I was making circuit boards and selling them. So I'm used to kind of doing my own thing. And so it was with some trepidation that I joined the BBC. In fact, when I flew over from Australia to interview, I was connecting to Wi-Fi, and there were two, Wi-Fi channels called Not With My Camel. And I figured any corporate employer that allows someone to have a Wi-Fi network called Not With My Camel can't be too bad. Anyway, I joined the BBC, and I rapidly figured the best way to get things done was to create a startup within the larger organization. And I discovered, there are books, particularly these days, on all of this, the lean startup, agile development. But in those days, there was nothing. And so I naively kind of made things up as I went along. And I realized that the best way to get things done was to create a startup within a large company, do customer-driven development. I discovered one of the things that iPlayer wasn't great and wasn't shipping was they were asking people within the BBC what they wanted. So they got completely the wrong optimization. I want moderation. I want, lowest bandwidth to save money, which means lowest quality. I've done this corporate deal over here. So the distribution is this way, but the quality is terrible. And so I just set about talking to customers and being a user myself to create it. I also developed, because I needed to prove to the team what a bad or good product was, I kept testing it myself and going to the team with, over the weekend, I use it. Here are 100 things that don't work. And the team would just try to explain away why everyone was just me. It's only you watching this. You've got a PC with this on. It's only you. So I needed something to prove it. So I thought I need to do customer testing. This is a fun anecdote. So I went to the I found the BBC's testing unit. And they said, oh, yeah, we can do customer testing. It'll cost £20,000 and take 6 weeks. I went, dude, there's no way I'm spending £20,000. And I don't have 6 weeks. I ship in 3 months. So I developed Anthony's chocolate box test. So I went to the supermarket and bought a few large boxes of Lindt chocolates, the nice, cool-looking ones. And then I said, I need a non-technical one. So I went to tester. So I went to level 5, the legal team, and I said, I will give you this fine box of chocolates if you test my product. So then I arranged in one of the BBC's rooms with big TVs. I got the tech team in the room, had the person sit down, say, what's your favorite show? Find your program. It was a complete disaster. Nothing worked. They couldn't find it. It was terrible. The team were like, but because the team had seen for themselves how, it was terrible as a user experience, said, great team, we're going to pick the top 5 things, and in 48 hours, we're going to fix those, and we're going to keep rinsing and repeating until the person loves it. We kind of whittled it to 3 things. It took 72 hours. But after the 4th time we did this, the person said, my favorite show is EastEnders. Oh, there it is on the homepage. Click, there it plays. It's like, yes, it was transformed. So you need to run things as a, startup within a big org. But the other thing, which is, the BBC's well known for its stakeholder and governance and things like that, which is the opposite of a startup. So I was lying in bed over the weekend and I thought, is life at the BBC better or worse or more or less entrepreneurial than a startup? And I realized that in a startup, maybe 5% of your time is doing stuff that you love. Maybe 20% of the time is what I call the cost of doing business. And in a startup, it's fundraising. Maybe if you raise money, it's investor reporting. It's the things your startup wouldn't proceed if you didn't do. And 5% is the stuff you really don't like doing, whether it's HR or other things. And actually, in the BBC, the breakdown was the same, except that instead of having to fundraise and do investor reporting, it was those BBC meetings of stakeholder and governance. And so you were swapping one set of the cost of doing business with another, but actually the 75% was the things you delight doing and the things that bring value to customers. And that was the same. And that got me out of bed in the morning going, actually, it's fine swapping the cost of business because it would be the same elsewhere, but I still get to do the cool stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, super interesting about the customer research as well, because I find that's really, I was running an e-commerce business for 7 years before, getting involved with the podcast. And we always found that such an important element because it's so easy to trick yourself. You can pick data anywhere, right? So if you need to go to the right customer group and, just generally how, I guess in terms of reviewing the customer experience as well, how do you make sure that you're picking the right group as well? Because I guess even if you're picking, say, a group of lawyers, for example, that might be a different customer group. Do you have any other ways that you used or any other tips that you have for customer research?
Absolutely. So identifying your, target customer is vital. If you pick the wrong person or you fail to pick somebody, you're going to do things incorrectly. So there's something called an ICP or ideal customer persona. And so if you are in the early stages of a business, you should picture you want to sell to an organization, but you're not selling to an organization. You're selling to people in the organization. And you should picture who that person is. So here's an example. Frequently, I see, SeedLegals customers send me their pitch deck, give me feedback and so on, or, give me feedback on the website. And they might be selling solutions to enterprise. Maybe it's now an AI system to change meeting workflows and organize meetings more effectively. In fact, to think of one that I was talking to just last night. And the problem is who in the organization is going to buy it. So if your website says, we transform meetings with AI, imagine people in your target company looking at it. And if everyone looking at it going, I'm not the decision maker, so this isn't relevant to me. I am the decision maker, but I don't write the check, so I can't make a decision here. I'm a person at meetings that would benefit from this, but I can't authorize it, so it's not for me. So if you don't get it right, everyone's going to look at it and go, that's great, but I can't do anything. So what you want is a smiling person, maybe 3 sections of your website identifying your 3 persona that are the decision makers. So the first thing is going to say, make meetings more effective. If you run meetings, click here to make your next meeting twice as effective. So now you're talking to the person who organizes the meeting. The next one might be, you're going to save 30% on your staff meeting costs with this product, and that's going to appeal to the financial controller who's going to pay for it. And then, you're going to have another one of some people in a big meeting room looking bored. Don't use stock images, but find other images. Don't use AI images, use real images. And going, stuck in meeting all day. Yes, we empathize. That's why we built whatever for meetings. Go, you can sign up for free and try it for 3 meetings a week. So now you're appealing to the person who doesn't have a budget, but is going to spread the word like a virus within the company that they're using this meeting thing, just as a hypothetical. So picking your persona, and at the BBC, it was exactly the same. Consumer testing team said that the first iPlayer users were tech geeks. So it turns out they analyzed lots of people and they were exactly like me. It was a sort of middle-aged male watching Top Gear on their HD TV who loved to have a set-top box and playing around with the cables and the 5.1 surround system. So iPlayer initially was targeting that. It was great because they were the early adopters. But then what's interesting is as the adoption broadened, and the next year, consumer research said it was, women at lunchtime watching EastEnders on their phones or their computers while they ate lunch, and that was a very different user behavior. It's, on your PC, you have to eat a sandwich and operate it with one hand. It's going to be bite-sized, jokes aside, segments, which means it needs to remember where in the show you are so you can pick up later. And, so the requirements change as your audience changes. So identifying your audience and having your message laser focused on them is critical to you building a business.
Yeah, super interesting. So you have to have some kind of general idea of a general direction in terms of the ICP, and then you support that as well with additional data to based on I guess research and customer research that you do. That's really interesting.
Yes, if I can hop in quickly, I think what's useful is just make up, if you don't know a particular person who might be an initial user, make up a couple of persona. You can find stock images of people, pin it to the wall. And so let's say in this meeting organization software example we used, you pick 3 people. Meet Alice. Alice runs the product team. She organizes 8 meetings a week with the team members. For her, the pay points are Bob is the person who signs off expenditure over £500 for the company. And so Bob needs to see that this is going to be a return on investment for the company, that the total cost for the year will be less than X, that they can get started at the terminate. So once you've got these photos of people with something about them, you can now direct all your messaging to this person. Of course, the danger is if you get your persona wrong and you've made up stuff that isn't a real person, then you might be coming up with something that's not right. But it's a great start. And if your website is not addressing these persona, you probably are going to find it hard to sell.
Yes, that makes sense. Another business that I was quite interested just to hear a little bit about was 6 Tribes as well, because you'll do a much better job of explaining it and how it works. But it seemed to be almost like a social networking like Facebook or Instagram platform, but way before its time.
Right. So 6 Tribes, the proposition is, on Twitter, the conversation is toxic because you're following people. People talk about all sorts of things. People rant about things. There's no community. It's all broadcast likes and so on. And so, your Twitter experience might be informative, but it's not pleasant. So what if you could transform things? Instead of following people, you'd follow topics. So that was the basis behind it. And you'd find your tribe, and you'd find 6 tribes, basically, a combination of the 6 we thought was a good number, and, managed to get the domain name. And so we would analyze your likes, the things you posted on social. We'd use actually machine learning in the days before AI was a thing to connect you with your tribes. And it was actually fascinating. So you'd log in with Facebook and would analyze your Facebook. And we created the initial tribes, and we had people posting content in tribes. And traffic, the growth was not stellar. Was not bad, not stellar. But feedback from people is we didn't want to log in with Facebook. We wanted to log in with phone. And, you know, we logged in with Facebook because then you had a real identity and so on. But people told us, if I want Facebook, then I'll just be on Facebook. I want 6 tribes. So I want something else. And so we added login with phone, and, you know, not unpredictably, the app began having other sides to it. And but what's fascinating is the audience skewed much younger, but also there were lots of LGBT plus, pansexual, transsexual, and it really found its mojo with a young audience, and traffic was taking off substantially, which was fantastic. There were a few problems. One of them is I had to tell the team to not open the app in the tube because there'll probably be a picture of a dick on the home screen. So I also had a deep and meaningful conversation with the team. You know, are you comfortable with this new direction? It's just taken off in a direction. It's fantastic. By the way, people love it. I was really worried when you'd open the app and somebody would post, I'm 15 and thinking of coming out. It's like, oh my God. But actually it was fantastic because these tribes were moderated by people and were filled with people who were community. And so there was none of the vitriol that you see on Twitter, and people were unbelievably nice to each other. So, but the problem is that the app was skewing into something that I wasn't the audience of myself. And, you know, in iPlayer days, I was the exact target audience, at least in the initial days. But now, you know, I didn't know what phone devices they have, what kind of media they want. And my investors were getting a bit worried that this new direction, they called me and said, I'm not sure, can you remove me as a shareholder? It's like, well, I don't think that's possible. So it was time to sell the app and, you know, do something new, which is what I did. But it was really interesting that it took off in a fairly substantial way, but in a way that the founder, you know, didn't identify with themselves. And I guess that's a time to find a, you know, new owner.
Maybe going down like the list of all your like projects. I mean, so I'm focusing on Kazaa, as Marcus said. Same for me. I remember the days where I was using Kazaa and Emule like to download things. I don't know if I knew if it was legal or illegal. Still really don't know today. But so essentially, I think can you maybe elaborate like quickly on you know that period of your life and that project? I also think I saw that. I mean, you said also like, so Kazaa was sued for like $1 billion. So can you elaborate maybe on this? Because I mean, when we listen to you, I mean, you seem very like, you know, peaceful, etc. But at the same time, when I read or saw something like this, I was like, my God, must have been like a fairly stressful moment. So I don't know how you lived it. What happened and you lived that period of time?
Yeah, well, you know, I wake up in the morning, I go, no one's suing me for $1 billion today. So it's a good day. No, jokes aside. So going back a little bit before Kazaa, I was doing real-time 3D graphics with a company in Australia, a company of about 150 people. I was CTO, building real-time 3D graphics for interactive movies. It was seriously cool. In like, you know, 40 years before, you know, or 30 years before Oculus and so on. So we needed distribution for our 3D engine. So we looked at the most downloaded apps and we bundled it with Kazaa, Morpheus, and others. And then we began working with those companies. We didn't create Kazaa, but we began working, and we created a licensed music store in the days before iTunes. And the goal was to get the music companies to license the songs to us so we could have distribution, because people were using these programs, ripping CDs, sharing them anyway. And the idea was to say to music companies, you have a business that's declining year, because of the rise of the internet, here's a new streaming solution with a huge audience base. And, I see parallels today with, the newspapers who sued Google, sued YouTube, now suing OpenAI, using our copyright content and so on. But really, I see these lawsuits in two ways. One of them is it's a colossal failure by the companies to innovate. They wish that the internet or the world was going backwards, not forwards, and that their, monopoly, in a sense, on distribution would remain. But the rise of technology is inevitable. You can sue this person, but there's that person. It becomes the new norm. So to fight the rising tide is a waste of time. Another strategy, which is rational for these companies, which is what the music companies did, is saying our sales are declining by $1 billion a year. Instead of embracing change, we'll spend $100 million a year on legal fees to try and sue everybody who's in the space. And it took probably 20 years and ultimately Spotify to come up with enough streaming revenue and enough of a business model and music rights, with many threatened lawsuits in between, for the music companies to finally go, oh, yes, we can make money from this internet thing. And I see exactly the same with the publishers that are suing AI companies. Instead of embracing with some lateral thinking, sometimes you don't know the answer, but sometimes you do, and you're just resisting it. And it's your corporate legal team who are trying to defend the past and instead of embrace the future. And whenever I see incumbents doing that, and it's in a sense the same with broadcasters who refuse to acknowledge and embrace the Twitches and the YouTubes and the others, to their eternal demise. And on the one part, it's rational behavior. Our best goal right now, since we own the market, is to pretend the others don't exist. But after a while, the cost of entry into a market that you've now lost is much higher than had you invested, purchased, owned space in that territory, rather than letting your ones that you ignored now be bigger than you, and then you're dead in the long term.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe so see on the SeedLegals journey. So professional services, really at the beginning, you built a product around it. How much of the platform was? How much the website was actually a platform providing versus like a window with people doing the work in the background, and how has it evolved over time? I mean, was it completely automated at the beginning already, or
Right. So you ask a great questions. The proposition is there are many, some legal things are really complicated and need humans, like criminal law and things like that. Others, contract law, specifically in our case around fundraising, are completely standardized. There are standardized documents and there are workflows that are much better done by computers than by lawyers. They're cap tables, share registries, maths, which lawyers are great at law, often not so good at maths. And when you hire an employee, there are standardized employment agreements. You don't need to spend hundreds of pounds with a lawyer when, for £90 a month or something like that, you get unlimited contracts. So, of course, what you're now looking to change is previously people went to lawyers. Can you persuade them there's a platform that can do these things? Now, building such a platform is non-trivial. And when you build something, you're also taking a bet as to what product features people need. And a typical mistake that founders make is in their quest for thinking it needs to cover all these feature requests, they build twice as much as anyone wants. And half the things people want, they don't get to build. So at SeedLegals, we figured when we're building, can we get the product live sooner and do things manually, and then skip or defer the technical work to build the full piece? So I call this these days, fake it till you make it. So, with many AI processes these days, building the AI is complicated, but you can get humans to do it in the meantime. But the humans don't scale. But it's a nice win-win if you get it right. So in the case of legal agreements, sometimes you can have an MVP that sort of semi-works, but I couldn't say, here's your funding round legal agreement. MVP, it may not hang together. I couldn't do that, but what I could do is have the legal team build it manually in Word. So what I did is initially we built the front end website. So it looked like the thing you'd enter the deal terms and a nice interface. But instead of the platform building the documents, which was struggling, our legal team would go and use Microsoft Word and then, upload the document. And it was brilliant because customers got what they wanted. We could ship 3 to 6 months earlier than had we built everything. Instead of the document being built in 3 seconds, it got built in, 3 hours or overnight. But there were only a few customers at the time. And so we could sell things, which was great. So you get revenue earlier, so you don't need to fundraise. And when you do fundraise, investors see you've got revenue. Your customers get a solution, and you, importantly, get to learn. We learned that half the things we were planning to build, there was no interest in those deal terms, so we didn't build them. And then we learned rapidly which things people did want, and we could build those. And then when our legal team started going, Anthony, you're killing us, we can't take it anymore, we knew it was time to automate that. So I'm a huge fan of fake it till you make it. And I think most businesses that I look at, people spend far too long building it when they could have built a front end and done things manually. I mean, Peter Thiel calls it, doing things that don't scale to get there faster. And if you find that nobody wants your service, you've saved yourself a lot of time building it. If people want it, then go raise some money and build it rapidly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I actually, I did a law degree at university in a previous life before moving into other things. But, and I just remember lawyers are very, very clear about their process. So they're very, very tight. And even sometimes going on Wikipedia to get like a case summary or something, the professors would always be like, don't do that. You've got to go to the textbooks, follow the process, etc. So I'm wondering, you mentioned fake it till you make it. How do you balance that with a very compliance-based space like law, for example, and ensure that everything is put up and set up in a compliant manner as well? So how do you balance those two?
Sure. Well, firstly, it was, actual lawyers doing the work. So it was no different ultimately to a law firm. You're just collecting data in a different way. Secondly, lawyers go off to PLC or other sources where they don't draft the, initial clauses themselves. They just nick them from somewhere and stick them together. Few lawyers are brilliant at drafting original content. It's almost always, at least for contracts, standardized templates, which, with little square brackets, insert your name. Computers do this in 100 milliseconds for $0. Why would you pay a human to do it for a lot of money? And now with AI, so taking a step back, one of the things I learned quickly at SeedLegals was what people are looking for is not a legal document. They're looking for investment or empowerment, and ultimately platforms empower. And I think that's why people change their behavior. It's empowerment. And so if you're a founder and you have to call a lawyer and book a call next week and they're charging a few £100 an hour, you know nothing about this process. They tell you, you ask them some questions, and at the end of it, people keep telling me at SeedLegals, for the first time, Anthony, I understand what I'm doing and what choices I need to make. When I spoke to a lawyer, I was left more bamboozled afterwards with all the risks and no idea what to do. So I joke, with the team that what we like to do is think, what would a law firm do? And then do completely the opposite. A law firm will tell you 12 things you could do. I'll tell you one thing you should do. I'll give you data to show what's market standard based on analyzing thousands or tens of thousands of contracts to go on a deal this size. Typically there are 3 directors and 2 of them are the founders and one's the investor. And if you show the same information to both sides of the table, people will get there faster. And then in terms of billing, it's not billed by the hour. It's a SaaS, pay by the month, unlimited help and support. It's on 24/7. So if it's a rainy Sunday and you want to find investors and do an investment, you can do it. So what people want is, and what I love to do is rethink, what do people really want? If your output is a legal document, once upon a time, that's all you got. But what you really want actually is you want to find investors, and then you want the fastest way to close the investment. And to do that, you don't want to be talking about many pages of legals. You want to be talking about a buzzword, a standardized contract. So we didn't invent the advanced subscription agreement, which is a way of getting money ahead of a funding round, but we productized it. We called it a seed fast. Some like 30,000 have been created. It's completely transformed UK fundraising. There's more than 70% of investment raised outside of a funding round than in a funding round. So now, people know, founders know, there's something called a seed fast. I don't need to know too much about it. It's actually only got 4 key deal terms, and it qualifies for SEIs, which fuels the UK startup economy, which means my problem is now just one related to finding investors. And when I find an investor, I go, would you like a seed fast? The investor knows about it as well. In the US, it's called a SAFE. And so really what's fascinating is by productizing something, showing both parties how it works, you've transformed the negotiation from pages of Word documents and tweaking words like, do you want best reasonable endeavors or commercially reasonable endeavors? I mean, it's nonsense. A startup fails or succeeds not on the basis of some minor contractual items, but whether people want their products or not. And funding rounds happen every year. So you put all this work into funding rounds, spend thousands on it. A year later, you throw it away and do a new one. My goal is to make all that cost of transactions go to zero, or, a small amount, because I've got to run a business. So you can focus on growing your startup.
So really, yeah, I mean, for one of the questions we had, like you really think it modified the deal-making process in some way. So founders are actually able to focus on what matters, which means finding investors and, developing some form of business plan and journey with them rather than spending time on papers.
Exactly. And what I like to do is I like to think of all problems in sort of 2 parts. One of them is, the actual business, which is what is the solution you'd be giving a customer? But the other part, which is intellectually interesting, is at a higher level, what are you changing and where's the social engineering coming into it? And so the other thing I realized when we started SeedLegals is a lot of this is contract negotiation and the legal docs is social engineering. So when lawyers are transacting with the Word document, the cost of changing any word in the Word document is the same, which means that lawyers have to spend time with other lawyers because they just freely redline the document and change all the words. It's insanely inefficient. What I do is the cost of changing some words is super simple. You say, I want 3 directors, or Bob's the director. Yeah. The platform builds the documents. It takes you 1 second and another second to create the documents. The cost of changing other words is really high. It's very difficult to just change some of the other words on SeedLegals, and people sometimes think it's a platform limitation, but it's a social engineering design so that you're forced to negotiate on the key terms and dissuaded from futzing around with everything else. And it makes everything far more efficient. And I liken it to, you buy a 2-door car, a coupe car. You don't try to work your way in through the boot or saw or back. You just go in through the front door. So if you make it really easy to enter one way, make a huge efficiency for doing that way, what happens is people change their behavior to take the path that you've created that's easy and not take the other path. And this is the bit I love. And actually almost all things you do in life, you, without even thinking of it, you do that. You go, for breakfast, what will I have? You open the fridge, I've got these. You could say, I'm going to make a souffle and I'm going to go to you don't. You just go, what do I have that I can do in the next 5 minutes? And life is much better that way. When you want a suit, you could go to Carnaby Street and spend thousands making a bespoke custom-made suit that will take weeks or whatever. 0 people do. You go off to anywhere from H&M to Boss, depending on your budget, and 10 minutes later, you walk out with your suit. And so with legals, why would you go to the equivalent of Carnaby Street to have something custom made when the data points show that these 4 sizes actually fit everyone? And what people didn't realize is the investors, they didn't want to go through all this trouble every time. If you come with a standardized set of legals for them, they see all of these companies. They don't want to read 500 or 200. So the platform efficiency is, nothing to do with SeedLegals, not a SeedLegals advert, but as a philosophical thing for whatever space you're in. If you can provide a simplified path, people will take that path instead of the complicated one that existed before.
Oh, super interesting. So you quickly touch base on the fact that entrepreneurs are actually looking for investment rather than losing time with the papers. SeedLegals recently acquired the pitch. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on the strategy, philosophy with this? Or now it seems that you are trying to probably cover a bit more of the funnel in some way.
Exactly. So, initially, I think we did a great job transforming the legals for fundraising. But as I said, nobody wants legal documents. They don't wake up in the morning and go, today I need a legal document. They go, no, today I need investment. So people keep calling us, can you find investors? And it's a challenge because people love us for the legal tech platform. Investor matchmaking is something very different. But at some point, it's time to go the next step. But in between, I also realized that in order for founders to be successful at raising investment, there's a lot more they need to know. They need to know, how do I create a great pitch deck? How do I do product? This is not my business, but as a passion, I love helping startups, and I need to do it in a scalable way. So I do lots of webinars, events, videos, and more. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see most days I try and post a video. Sometimes it's a founder interview. Sometimes I'm going for a run and I have this idea. Tranched rounds. Nobody knows how to. A customer asked about a tranched round, so I'll make a video on it. Or these days, it's the Delaware flip. It's the hottest thing, which is founders looking to incorporate in the US. And with a brief diversion, over the first 6 years of SeedLegals, I mean, I could count on one hand the total number of people talking about the Delaware flip. This is where you take your UK company and you create a top company in Delaware, which is a popular state in the US for incorporation, so that you can more easily raise from US investors. It was hugely expensive, complicated, and almost nobody did it. And then it started becoming, I started getting some more calls. And then we productized it on SeedLegals. And my goal is to reduce the cost from, $50,000 for a law firm to maybe $5,000, demystify it and provide all the solutions. And now we're doing literally 2 or 3 customer calls per day for people on the Delaware flip. And I joke, it's either my LinkedIn posts or Rachel Reeves driving this trend for founders to want to at least, if not leave the country, but at least move their companies to the US. You can still be in the UK, you just have a Delaware corporation. And I think 12 months from now, the new norm is going to be you're just going to incorporate in Delaware. So as Companies House keeps introducing higher prices, makes more friction, shareholder details to be made public when you want them private, the tax increases and so on. It's a big world. And if it costs little money, $449 to incorporate in Delaware, you can make your company in Delaware as easily as in the UK now. And my goal is to productize that. But that's, again, identifying a customer need. But one interesting thing, and I'm sorry, it sounds like a ramble, but I think there's an interesting thing you realize if you're lucky enough that your business is reasonably successful. Initially, you're trying to follow the market standard and you're trying to find a new technological process to implement an existing market standard. So at SeedLegals, the standardized legal documents, could we just do them more efficiently? But once you become popular, you start making the market standard. And so our thermometer data that shows people what's standard in funding rounds, at different size funding rounds for different negotiations, now influences what terms people choose, because people look at thermometer and go, this is standard. If we say that this term is standard, 90% of people will start selecting it. I think we're now seeing a shift, the zeitgeist, which is, it used to be very difficult to incorporate in the US. Actually, now it's like super easy. Just follow this person on LinkedIn and you'll see every few days a tip on how to incorporate in the US. And these people are raising in the US. And so it's this, as something becomes common, everything changes and people flip to that. And I think that again goes into social engineering. And, if you want to own and maintain an existing process, you have to be extremely wary of that, because as soon as the flip changes, I think it's very hard to get back to the original status quo.
And just so you mentioned expansion into the US there. So just a quick question on the US, general US state. So how would you describe the state of legal tech out there? Are you seeing the same issues, like the core problems that you mentioned in the UK, that startups need investment, for example, and it's, expensive to get the legals done? What is the state of technology there?
Right. So it's fascinating. So probably two things. Firstly, the US isn't one country. You quickly learn it's 50 states, all with slightly different laws. The good news is startup incorporation is almost all in Delaware. So you only have to think about Delaware law. But the other thing is, the legal system in the UK has been reformed. It's really fantastic. It's a world leader. At SeedLegals, we don't have to be a law firm, even give legal advice. We don't set ourselves out to be a law firm. But if somebody asks us how this term works or what does it mean in the document, we can freely tell you. The US is very heavily regulated on legals. You can't provide legal advice unless you're a law firm. It's the lawyers trying to protect their own interests. Of course, this is all going to be changing with AI, where ChatGPT is going to tell you stuff regardless, and people just go to ChatGPT because it doesn't charge $900 an hour. It gives you an answer in a second. So as we enter this market, we have to adapt our product proposition. There are different players and competitors in the space already. But the key thing I've observed is in the UK, thanks to SeedLegals and generally lower legal costs anyway, when you want to raise money, you can do a funding round, or you can raise with what we call a seed fast ahead of the round. We call it Agile fundraising. A funding round's like getting all the investors on the bus together. You have to wait for them all to arrive. Then you send a term sheet and a shareholders agreement. And this was the way it was done before. But now you can find a single investor. I call it like getting an Uber, and you create a simplified document that says, I give you my money, you'll give me shares later, at a valuation we agree later, and we're good to go. In the UK, because the cost of the funding legals is low, founders interchangeably flip between a funding round and, these raising ahead of a round. In the US, it's quite binary. A funding round costs you $50,000. But Y Combinator said, that's insane. We'll make these documents and make them available for free on the internet, called a SAFE. So the binary system you see in the US is people go, I'm just going to download these from the internet, do them myself, not involve a lawyer, and then one day spend $50,000 with lawyers in a few years when I'm raising millions. And so I discovered that founders in the US are making far more mistakes than in the UK. They create the wrong company type. They don't know about the tax benefits. They don't know how they get diluted. And it's all because the cost of lawyers is really high, so people DIY on downloading free documents. And so there's a big open space for SeedLegals to get into in the same way that we are in the UK. But in the same way, when we started in the UK, it's changing people's behavior. They, either I'm downloading a free doc or I'm spending $50,000. Should I spend $2,000? Is that the best or worst of all worlds? And so how do I create the desire for this new space in the middle? And that's a fascinating problem to solve.
So, touching on the legal tech space, so it's pretty hot at the moment with the Harvey legal raising tons of money, etc. Where does SeedLegals, fit in the space? Do you see them as, potentially becoming some sort of competition, helping law firms lower the $50,000 mark to get papers, or do you think it's completely different, or because you are super focused? Where do you fit in all of this?
Of course, these are great questions. And in the same way, my career has been about inadvertently, not intentionally, disrupting existing businesses. When you wake up in the morning, you have to be careful that your own business isn't disrupted. So, but broadly, there are huge numbers of AI legal tech companies. I think they're mostly set up by disaffected lawyers wanting to sell to law firms. I don't sell to law firms. I sell to consumers. So other thing, which is interesting, is if law firms bill by the hour. So if you go to a law firm saying, I've got this fantastic software, instead of, it taking you 10 hours to do a funding round, it now takes you half an hour. The law firm might go, sorry, why are you trying to sell me this? I used to be able to bill 10 hours and I only bill half an hour now. I can't still bill the 10 hours. So the selling to law firms is tricky. But what I see as the moat with SeedLegals is there are many contracts. You can go to ChatGPT and you can say, make a contract. But when you're doing a funding round, there's the cap table, there's the deal terms, there's a particular workflow. And, if you might liken it to booking a flight. So a few years ago, these chatbots became hugely popular for about 15 minutes because they were a disaster. So Skype, you can book your flights on Skype. So you go, great, I want to go to Berlin. And then it'd say, what day do you want to go? And then it'd go Saturday. Then it says, I've got a 10 a.m. flight. You go, do you have later? And eventually going, for fuck's sake, just take me to Kayak website, show me the flights you've got and the pricing, because this chat interface is the wrong solution to this problem. And that's what I see as well with SeedLegals, which is, yes, you can go to ChatGPT and you can ask a lot of questions, but it's insane because the funding round's got like 100 deal terms. You don't know which ones you should ask. Don't know the data on it. And so if ChatGPT or an AI system goes, here's a funding round document, it's a disaster because you don't know what's in it. You don't know what you're signing up for. You probably have to go to a lawyer to analyze it. At SeedLegals, we take the different approach. We take you through the deal terms. Do you want this? Do you want that? By the way, 90% of people do this. And then we'll build the document for you so you can trust the document because you know the inputs. And you have selected the input, so you know what you're signing up for. Funding round documents are a set of protections for the founders and for the investors. And so there's a pendulum you can sort of dial, very investor-friendly, very founder-friendly. If you're raising £100,000 from angel investors, it'll be very founder-friendly. Raising 5 million from a VC, you can have very different terms. And the goal is to help you understand those, help you negotiate, and then build the documents. So I can't pretend that AI won't change things. In fact, we're embracing AI at SeedLegals on a range of things, from reviewing documents to, investor matchmaking and more.
Okay. So what do you think of Legora then? Because, from what I understood, they provide AI to law firms to make them more efficient, improve their relationships with clients, etc. But from what you said in terms of economics and business models for law firms, you are just telling them, okay, you'll do the same, but faster. So either a law firm charges the same amount of hours while they work maybe half those hours, or what's your analysis on their model within the larger market?
Sure. So I don't know, their obviously business proposition, but clearly, law firms would like to save costs. They also see competition with other law firms. So you've got your work cut out selling the law firm on the reason to use your software. The law firms could invent new products, which are certain types of products, or legal reviews are inexpensive and some more expensive. And I think what will be interesting to see, which law firms, in a sense, break ranks first to offer, new AI-driven products for some things and, human for the rest. So it's a fascinating space because, in a sense, if no law firm jumps first, then everyone preserves the billable hour. But as soon as some come up with some vastly different approach, then everything changes. Now, law firms, and certainly in the US, legal advice needs to be provided by a human. So there has to be a human in the loop. But what happens is then people use platforms that don't need a lawyer, started from ChatGPT, or, there are many that in verticals change things. And that's exactly what SeedLegals does. In a vertical, it uses technology, and the product is actually almost incidental that there's a legal document. I want to find an investor, agree something, and get money from them. What's the least effort I need to do on that? And sometimes there's a legal document, sometimes it's something else. There's filings with Companies House, and there's pitch pages. There's a range of things. A legal document's just one part of that. And I think that's the important thing to recognize.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you briefly mentioned AI. Talking about Legora and that space and AI more generally. You know, AI is known to hallucinate, and there is a big problem. Well, I guess the reason you pay for lawyers is that you know that a trainee lawyer might still need to read that document, even though they're very expensive and they're qualified, because there's just like one tiny detail on the data that has to be right, and if that tiny detail is wrong, then everything could be wrong. So the partner's relying on that person. How do you solve that with AI? Is it going to be an issue, or is it potentially not applicable in that sense? I mean, you've recently launched Lawrence, your AI tool. So
Right. So, I mean, you could say AI builds documents. So you go to ChatGPT or whatever, go, I want a contract with a greengrocer for the supply of apples, and make a contract. And it'll come up with something. And your challenge is you have no idea if it's a good contract or a bad contract. You can read it, but you don't, for example, know which things are right. In particular, you don't know what's not in the document. So you get a document, but, you know, did it cover what to do if the apples are bad, or if you don't pay, or the other person goes out of business without delivering? The endless numbers of things. At SeedLegals, we don't use AI for the creation of documents. We use document generation based on deal terms. So you reliably and deterministically get the same documents for the same inputs. And with something like 1 million documents created on SeedLegals, you know, they've all been heavily peer reviewed. And every time somebody wants something that the document doesn't do, we look to enhance it on the platform. So it's pretty much market standard. So the approach we take at SeedLegals is different. They're not AI generated. But, for example, people might want to query things using AI. So we've got our chat bot. You can ask it a range of questions. You know, how many shares does Alice have? Or, you know, tell me what the liquidation preference is in this document. So AI is there to help our customers. I mean, the nice thing is AI can get used in many, many ways. An example of the way we use it is in the UK. The UK startup ecosystem is fueled by tax benefits for angel investors called SEIS and EIS. Many will know it, but if you invest in a company as an UK angel personal investor, you can subtract 50% of your investment from your income tax. It's awesome. And if you keep the shares for 3 years, you pay no capital gain tax. Now, startup founders want to tell their investors that they can get this. And to do that, you write to HMRC and you get what's called advance assurance. You can do it on the HMRC site, but it's about a 60% or something approval rate. You can do it on SeedLegals. It's a 99% approval rate. Why? Because there are about 50 different things the team check. And so a while back, we introduced an AI helper that does the first pass check. The team still do the final check. But instead of waiting while the team review it, you get instant results. So you upload your pitch deck, AI analyzes it. It runs these 48-point checks where we've developed the prompts based on analyzing like 10,000 of these applications, and then can tell you instantly, change this won't work, this will be flagged, your company's trading for too long, you're trading in land, whatever it might be, and you can iterate. So I think the interesting thing is we don't want to trust the AI fully to do the analysis, but we want to catch 90% of the issues in seconds rather than days, so that the customer gets a faster outcome and our team can be more efficient.
Understood. So yeah, it's a matter of covering the most of things quickly, and then the fine tuning, you'll do that later. So still on an AI topic. So I mean, you produce some reports on SeedLegals. I think in your 2026 forecast, you are saying that thanks to AI, essentially, like building software is becoming cheaper and cheaper. So the product isn't the value anymore, and it's not what cutting it anymore. It's more about distribution. I mean, does it mean that the technical confounder era is over? Yeah, what if you can elaborate a bit on this? Would be quite interesting.
Right. So this is really, really important for founders to understand. So investors, when they invest, they're often looking for the moat. as they say? What is that you own that is hard for other people to cross? And it often used to be the technical implementation. We've got the smart technical team, only we can build it. But with AI tools, vibe coding and Claude Code and so on, the cost of execution is declining substantially. So AI can build many things much faster. So you can no longer rely on the technical execution as being your differentiator. So if you think about it, 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago, when there was no cloud computing, you had to raise $1 million just to buy Cisco servers and switches before you could ship anything. And then came AWS, and now for, a few $100s a month, you could have those servers, and your distribution or your hosting got 1,000 times cheaper. But you had to spend hundreds of thousands or more on software developers. But if you can now vibe code something, and it's not quite there, but you can do amazing things, in a few hours yourself, that's the hundreds of thousands or millions you need on software development teams evaporates. So what is the moat? And I was at an investor event in New York a couple of weeks ago, talking about exactly that. They're saying there's basically only 2 moats left: the founders and, their personality cult and able to sell and vision, and distribution. So if you get distribution for your drinks with Ocado or with Boots or, Walmart or whatever it might be, and you've got a unique, agreement, that might give you the edge. But if you tell your investors you can build it, and you need lots of money for that is now seen as a cost, not an advantage. And if you show people a mock-up, they're going to assume that it's going to be vibe coded and, tested and so on. I need to raise before I will build anything. No, go build it on your own money first and then come to me for investment. So you have to transform your fundraising strategy to get a lot further yourself on your own money. Because again, not that long ago, you could never create something working yourself without spending, £30,000 or dollars or whatever on outsourced developers or, hiring somebody. But now you can make a working mock-up. It may not do very much, in 15 minutes on Lovable, and you have no excuse for investors, walking away if you haven't built a somewhat working or at least testable prototype. Because why would I give you money if you haven't even taken the effort yourself to verify in no time at all that you've created an interface that people want?
Yeah, really interesting. And so you talk about fundraising strategy. So you said that maybe that needs to be adjusted sometimes, and you've already mentioned the ASA agreements. Or I think, convertible notes as they use them, or safes in the US. So does that, this model of raising 70% outside of actual rounds, do you think that's a sustainable model moving forward? Or can you think of any negatives to that? You might say, for example, if you raise a full round, like in the traditional way, that if you have that amount of money, investors are sure that you're going to be able to stay around and do what you want to do. Whereas if you don't raise enough, you might not. So are there any potential negatives that you could think of this kind of model?
Great question. So the goals for the founders and the investors are sometimes aligned and sometimes the opposite. So for an investor, let's say you tell them I need to raise £500,000 for getting my project live. The worst case for the investor, well, the obvious worst case is, you raise the money, you spend it, nobody wants it, you go out of business. But the other problem is you persuade the investor to invest their £50,000 ahead of getting the other investors. They give you the £50,000. You're unable to raise the rest, and you've told them you need £500,000 to build the product. You've only got their $50,000. It's just wasted money. They're the only schmuck that has given you money. So for the investor, they want to make sure you collect all the money for the funding round before they give you any money. But for you as the founder, it's the opposite. If you're a founder and you need an engineer or outsourced development, you don't need £500,000 in the bank today. If you had 50,000, that's fantastic. You can stop paying for the business yourself. You can start hiring people. You can get things built. So as the founder, you want a small amount of money today so you can get on with building it. And as you raise a small amount, you can then build more, so the valuation increases. Instead of having a PowerPoint presentation, you can have some MVP, some working code. So the goal of the founder and the investor is opposite. That's really what's transformed, which is the legal tools like a Seed Fast or a Safe that have become completely standardized, which allow founders to do these one-off ahead of a funding round deals. But that doesn't mean you don't have your work cut out persuading your investor that this is a good strategy for them as well. Why is it a good strategy? Well, you give them a discount. If you come in now, then when I close the rest of the rounds and I'll give you shares, I'll give you a 10 or 20% discount. Well, I'll put a valuation cap. So if I raise it a higher amount, you'll still get shares at this lower amount, so you'll get more shares. You might also, have them say, well, we'd really love to help you by coming in earlier, you get to go faster. So you need to play all the cards that have the investor avoid the love what you're doing, call me when you've got all the other investors. And I think this is a pattern that's fundamentally changed, because when we introduced Seed Fast in 2018, almost nobody knew them, and it would be standard. Investors go, dude, are you mental? Why am I coming in first? And what is the strange agreement that says I give you money and you'll give me shares one day? But now it's completely standard in the US, because they're so easy and standardized and don't need lawyers for the most part. Everyone goes, forget all these legal fees, dude, send me a safe. Where do I sign? And, that's the wonderful commoditization of, legals in a sense, but also the changing pattern brought about by new, in this case, legal instruments.
You review essentially like countless pitch decks, I assume, and you see a lot of them going through, landing on your desk without like really necessarily. You don't have to name names. What are like the common mistake, like big red flags you see like most founders would make?
Sure. There's one that's a mile ahead of everything else, which is you meet a founder and you say, what do you do? And they tell you passionately what they do. For example, to be, let's say insurance. So I meet you and you tell me, hey, insurance is broken. You're paying 50% too much for your house insurance. It's insane. Did you know if you just shopped around, you could save 30% on your house insurance? Why aren't you doing it? And you go, that's a really great point. I could save 50%. Where, if you give me a button I can click, I'll go do it. And then you go look at their pitch deck or their website. And instead of saying exactly this passionate solution for you, it says, we use AI and blockchain to revolutionize insurance with an agentic framework. And you go, I've fallen asleep already. I have no idea what this is about. So the biggest problem by far I see as a mistake that founders make is they explain what they do and essentially how clever they are, rather than presenting a solution they want. So when I look at people's websites or pitch decks and they want feedback, almost always I'm going to look to transform it from what we do to why you want it. And in fact, an example of one I was talking to just last night, which is, meeting optimization, the website said agentic AI frameworks, and they said the investor feedback was, we actually don't understand what you do. And so my party trick is I go to Lovable and I dictate a prompt, create a website that's a better version of, insert name of website, so that it pulls in the styling and so on, that shows how, and now you explain something is broken, here's how we fix it, here are 3 use cases, do a competitor analysis, create a pricing page, add customer testimonials, make a modern, vibrant site with rich lifestyle images, and then I go make a cup of coffee. And I come back and I'm blown away at how much better it is. It's like 100 times better. And it took 10 minutes to do it. It's insane. So you've got no excuse for making a crappy website that talks about agentic AI instead of how you transform or solve for your, customer personas. Have them in mind and picture them and have a picture. So
essentially be more truthful instead of trying to follow some hype, etc.
Exactly. It seems sort of boring, right? So And in the case of the meeting rooms, you have a picture of people in a meeting room looking bored, and it says your next meeting will be a lot more fun and shorter, and you probably won't have it. Click here to see how, or invite the right people to your next meeting. By showing a picture of somebody, either the person arranging the meeting, the assistant, or the person managing it or running it, you see yourself in this position and you push this button, says sign up now or get a demo. That's what you want.
No, makes sense. Also, in terms of Europe versus now, many people are essentially bashing Europe in some way. I mean, what is? I mean, are the US really like the El Dorado from what you? For a lot of people will understand why it's better, in terms of markets, etc. But it's so pink. I mean, is the picture so bright and nice, or I mean, you
It's
see
pink
like
and
another
a
type
bit
of
orange. It's a bit orange as well these days, right? Well, the thing in America is two things. One, there's vast amounts of money floating around ready to invest. Valuations are higher. Amounts that companies are raising are much higher. But there's also perception that there's a different risk reward. And in, the UK and Europe, it's the investor mentality is what's the least amount of money that you need to raise to get to profitability, so I stop being diluted. In the US, it's how much you need to own the market and change the world and be a unicorn. And so there's the lure of much higher investment amounts and higher valuations in the US. And my goal is twofold. One, to make that much more accessible to UK founders, but also to have them understand whether it's a waste of time to talk to US investors, because the problem was not UK investors, it's them. And let's jump into this for a moment, because a big problem is that founders talk to investors in the UK and they decide the investors are meh. Nobody understands what I'm doing. They don't want to make an investment. The investors are terrible. The valuations are low. And then you look at the pitch deck and it's nothing to do with the investors. It's you're uninvestable, or you haven't explained what you do, or the market size is too small. So if the reason you're going to the US for investment is because you're not getting it from UK investors, there are two possibilities. Yes, UK investors are meh and El Dorado is the US, or two, US investors are going to tell you exactly the same thing because you're just not attractive for investment. And so my goal is to help founders before they get on a plane to discover that. Get on calls with US investors. You don't have to create a Delaware company. Get on a call. And if the investor's not interested, then you've saved yourself a lot of effort. If the investor's interested but says you need to be a Delaware company, well, good news. In 3 weeks, you can be a Delaware company. So for a very small amount of money. But first, understand that there's a US investor who would like to invest in your company. And a condition of investing is that you're a US company. So, by the way, why do US investors want US companies? A few reasons. One, they understand US laws. They don't understand English or French or German law. Two, in the same way we've got these SEIS tax benefits in the UK, there's a tax benefit, not as good, but still significant, called QSBS in the US. If the investor invests in a C corporation in the US, keeps their shares for 5 years, they pay no federal capital gains tax up to the higher of $15 million or 10x their investment. So it's very attractive for US investors to want a US company. So now you've got a choice as a founder. I think firstly, absolutely go reach out to US investors and start talking to them. The cost of doing that is low. You'll realize very quickly the art of the pitch to US investors is different. They want to see you owning a huge market rather than just getting to profitability. And then you also now know, if the US investor says, I'm interested, call SeedLegals. We've got all the tools to help you in the way that just wasn't possible before. I think what's in an interesting quandary is if founders are now preemptively going, I'm going to reach out to US investors. So I'm not even going to incorporate in the UK in the first place. I'm just going to incorporate right from the get-go in Delaware. and taking that forward bet. And I'm seeing more people doing that.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you very much for that. Super interesting. Maybe to essentially close the conversation, one last question regarding one article you published again on SeedLegals, where you say turn your brand into an investor magnet, which I think is a quite interesting topic. I mean, in a nutshell, how do you do this, and what do you mean by turning essentially your brand into an investor magnet?
Why do investors want to invest? They want to invest because they think that this is going to be successful. Of course, when you are successful, that's fantastic. But until you're successful, how do you fake it till you make it, in a sense, in the nicest way, right? So the first thing is to punch above your weight. And I see too many founders, they don't put any time into content marketing. They don't put any time into building the brand of the founder. And so when an investor Googles you, you just don't exist. It may even be some other random website that comes up ahead of yours. Why are you going to change the world? And why would I invest in you changing the world when you just don't exist? My natural inclination as an investor is say, call me later. But if you can work on that content, if you can post on LinkedIn, build your following, or Insta or TikTok, wherever your crowd is, build your following. So when investor, they keep seeing you in the feed. They think you're everywhere. They think everyone's using your product. And then they Google you and like you're everywhere. You're on Reddit posts and you're here, and Google does a great job indexing LinkedIn posts. And they go, oh my God, you're huge already. I want in. So you need to manufacture that FOMO initially to the extent you can, right? You have to be careful because if you create the wrong intention or press, you might overhype things when the reality doesn't match it. So if you're listed in TechCrunch and the investor thinks, oh my God, everyone in the world is using you, but only TechCrunch readers know about you, they'll be a bit disappointed when they realize you've got no users later. But I think it's all about creating that persona to stand out. Why? Because there's so many startups. It's not just about building a product. It's about people knowing about it and wanting it and thinking that this is going to be hot and therefore getting in. And of course, it needs to be good as well. So a lot of it is about creating the larger than life persona and cutting through the noise. And I think that's really what I was talking about in that article.
Super. But look, thank you very much, Anthony. It was super insightful. I think I could have continued asking like hundreds of questions. Unfortunately, we don't have 3 days. but really, thank you very much for your time. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks,
and we hope to have you on board maybe again in the future.
Well, thank you for your super insightful questions and for giving me the latitude to talk philosophically and products and founder and more. I hugely enjoyed it. And obviously, as you can tell, I'm hugely enthusiastic at helping founders get there faster.
Yeah, we can definitely see that and really feel it more than seeing it, to be honest. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.